I was doing a Rachel Maddow one time, and I was doing it in a local TV studio in DC, and they had me staring at a statue of Beethoven, which was where, they wanted me to be looking. It was just off camera. And it was like a 20-minute hit or something. And if you stare at a statue, dude was moving, like the face was
Starts to contort.
absolutely, like you're staring at it for 20 minutes. Like I was like, oh, this is probably
That's crazy.
It's kind of like a religious experience for a lot of folks, right?
Welcome to Threat Vector, the Palo Alto Network's podcast, where we discuss pressing cybersecurity threats and resilience and uncover insights into the latest industry trends. I'm Michael Sikorski, the CTO of Unit 42, and I'm taking over the Threat Vector podcast today as your host. I'm joined here with Jason Healy, a senior researcher scholar at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Jay, welcome to Threat Vector.
Las Vegas, 9 a.m., Threat Vector. This is the place to be. Threat vectoring.
Exactly. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I've been teaching at Columbia University for, I think it's 11 years now.
Wow.
And that's sort of how we first got in touch, although we did overlap together at the NSA, I believe, as well, back in the day. I think it's really interesting how the computer science world, which is where I teach, and the School of International Affairs, where you teach, has a lot of overlap, right? And things really start to come together there, especially when we talk about, I see you wearing your Cyber WarCon shirt. Can you give the audience some insight on your perspective as to how cybersecurity has evolved over your time? Spending time in the military, the White House. Now you're an academic focused on the threat at a bigger policy scale. Can you talk about that change over time?
Yeah, thanks, Siko. It's just like you're right. It's incredible how amazing this field that we're in. That we both teach in the same place, but you're on this super technical reverse engineering. I'm dealing with policy students, but we're both trying to say, how can we make things better? Like, how can we defeat the threat actors? How can we leave the world a better place? And the field is so big, right? We've had folks that are students that, were sociologists and they're working on Rikers Island with youth offenders before they came to us, to lawyers, to business school, to people that have, CVEs to their credit. And it's a big field, and I think we're going to need to keep it big so that we can solve these problems. I've been lucky enough, one of my colleagues, Bill Woodcock, says, lucky enough to start early and never look away. And in that, just been able to look at this from a lot of different perspectives. But to really answer your question, one of the things that I did was I did the first history book of cyber conflict. Came out 10 years ago. And it was just looking at, if we treat this as military history, right? I came into this through the Air Force. And how does the story look? And some of the quotes that I came across while I was doing that book, I found really astounding. Quotes like, contemporary technology cannot secure a system in an open environment, right? That if you have uncleared people and it's not locked away in its own vault, then you can't secure it. Quotes that say the red team always gets through. And those quotes were from 1970 and 1972. So it's been 50 years that we know that the attackers have these advantages. That if the red team gets through, it's saying to some degree that the threat actors are going to get through, that the threat actors have a lot of advantages in their favor. And just having that perspective that, wait a minute, we're not 10 years, we're 15 years into this. Like, our grandparents were dealing with the same stuff as we are. And unless we do better, our grandkids are going to be inheriting a worse internet and a worse cyberspace than we have today.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think there has been some change in recent years. I think your talk at Black Hat specifically focuses on some of the groundbreaking nature of the national cybersecurity strategy and the shift that's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Seen a noticeable shift when it comes to collaborative defense, where
Hmm.
I think agencies are more willing to
Hmm.
collaborate. When we worked at the NSA, you didn't tell anybody you worked there. Now they have a cyber collaboration center, which is a
Yeah.
great thing. We see that going. What do you think, triggered this really big movement the last couple years? Do you think without I think of SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline, those two big
Hmm.
events, and like somebody seeing disruption to our gas lines, and then also the speed and growth in which China and Russia
Hmm.
continue to escalate, and specifically the escalations in the wars in those regions. Do you think that's what's pushing it, or do you see it a different way as to why we're finally getting this doctrine that we were always missing and
Yeah.
focus of like this is a real war that's going to have be more and more costly over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I never thought of it quite that way, right? Because I suspect there's both supply and demand, right? I mean, there's both been, like you say, the wars that's getting, I mean, there's a land war in Europe, and there has been for kind of like 10 years now. Certainly since the full scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that is focusing attention, and I find that particularly important because I think there's been when states were at relative peace, right? In the post Cold War era, was the longest period of peace we've had. States in general were not causing cross-border harm, right? So on my side of the campus, right, there's a lot of folks in international relations. And one of the astounding things they've found is that post-Cold War, every kind of cross-border violence has gone down. And so to me, it hasn't been a surprise that we haven't seen nations using offensive cyber capabilities to really cause harm, right? We've been pulling our punches, and it's largely been an espionage game. So my concern is yeah, as you pointed out, now that we're having more geopolitical crises, we're having states that are invading their neighbors for territorial gain. We have to start worrying about a PRC invasion of Taiwan. That states are going to be using these in a more dangerous manner. And so, fortunately, I think that that's helped drive this. But it's also been, I think, a good supply, and by that I mean the agencies getting together, the White House. Uh, you know, when I was in White House the first time, there were four of us that were looking at the internet and cybersecurity. The NSC, even 3 years ago, they had maybe 6 people, 8 people that were looking at defense. Now, at the Office of National Cyber Director, you've got 70. That allows them to get in a lot more detail and focus in on things like budgets and skilled workforce and these other areas that we just didn't have the investment. We just didn't have the resources to invest in.
Yeah, I found that I was actually testified to Congress, I don't know, a few months ago
Hmm.
at this point, and it was amazing the interest level and the questions that were given when it comes to educating the
Hmm.
workforce, thinking about how to get ahead of that now for the future, and it was really awesome to see that the government's taking that turn. I think all
Yeah.
of this strategy has really been the impetus for that, and then these agencies realizing that if they collaborate with each other, they could be more effective against the threat has also been great to see. I want to talk a little bit about your Black Hat Talk, which centers around is defense working? How are we doing from a offense versus defensive perspective? And one of the things that I tend to mention is I think we've actually are pretty decent at detection of attacks. One example I always give is SolarWinds, and doing a lot of follow-on incident
Hmm.
responses for that, where Russia is running around people's networks. When we went in and took a look at their logs, they often had the detections
Huh.
of the threats that were happening, but they didn't weren't able to put it together. Just kind of curious about how your talk fits in with regards to, how is defense doing
Yep.
against offense, especially, being an employee of Palo Alto Networks, biggest cybersecurity company. So just kind of want to get insights to you there, and then maybe we could talk through some of the framework that you've put together.
Yeah. So to continue kind of the origin story, right? I said it's been 50 years. And so a lot of my work, including my last three Black Hat talks, we're expanding on this idea of saying, boy, the attackers seem to have had these advantages. What can we do? Like, what are the innovations that we can do at the greatest scale and least cost to shift that advantage to the defense? We've done this at Columbia University, our New York Cyber Task Force. And those ideas got picked up by the White House into the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which I helped draft, to say, good, how can we shift more advantage to the defense? So this talk is, all right, how do we measure that? How do we know if we're succeeding? Not just, so many of our focus is on input metrics, like you talked about, where, well, we're collaborating more. Well, that's nice, and it's important, but is it actually leading to the results? Is it actually disrupting threat actors? Is it reducing vulnerability? Is it reducing impact? And so that's what this talk is diving into and saying, boy, we need a framework so that we can dive in and understand the metrics and indicators that we have to see not just are we collaborating more, not just are we training more cybersecurity experts, but are we actually succeeding against the threat actors so that, again, our grandkids are going to have a better time than we do. And you're right, one of those, mean time to detect, substantial decreases across the board. Substantial, from hundreds of days to now something like 12 days. And that's not just one source that has that. We've got that from multiple sources that have reported that. So good, we can say that's great, but what else would we expect to see if we're really disrupting threat adversaries, threat actors? And I don't mean just disruption in like you're doing botnet takedowns, but we're catching them earlier. We are, we're patching better, so we're not giving them enough, as much stuff. What would we expect to see if we're doing that on a large scale? Sure, we'd expect to see a decrease in mean time to detect and dwell time. We'd also expect to see the adversaries are forced to turn over their TTPs more frequently. We would expect to see that we're forcing them from the easy TTPs, logging in with valid credentials, and we're forcing them to hack. We would expect to see a more rapid turnover of vulnerabilities, and therefore more 0 days and a higher price for 0 days. So as far as I
Right,
can
because
tell,
they can't sit using the same thing over and over again, which is what they tend to do, right? Like they
absolutely.
don't upgrade. I remember the early days of doing, chasing China out of a lot of companies' networks, and you'd go in and there'd actually be version control on the malware, and you'd be like, oh, this is just version 1. They didn't even upgrade to version 2 in
Right,
your
right, right,
network. Like
right.
that, you haven't even made it that far. And I also think about the fact that, I'm on the board of the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is how
Oh, right.
getting
Oh, great. Yeah.
getting cybersecurity companies to collaborate with each other, which in and of itself I think is a big deal. However, we've been passing a lot of indicators around historically, and we're starting to realize that a lot of those indicators actually overlap with things we already have in our systems. And so, how much of a difference is it making? And we're realizing that focusing more on the highly contextual stuff, like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, TTPs, what 0 days they're using, and also sharing with each other when we're about to release like major research is super helpful to get protections in place. If you think about a lot of the 0 days we've seen over the last year and a half, and vulnerabilities being the number one way that attackers are getting in the incident responses that we're responding to in Unit 42, I see that ratcheting up, and it's because nation state starts with it, but then a POC comes out, and all
Right,
the crime
right.
wares groups grab onto it, and then it's like wildfire throughout the world for that vulnerability. But by sharing those things
Mm-hmm.
early, we can get in front of it, because it's patch management's very hard. But if you get a lot of these vendors to collaborate and they could put protections in place, like with a lot of these major vulnerabilities, our technology could actually protect while the company is in the process of actually patching.
Yeah.
And
And can I
yeah,
say, yes, absolutely great. And Cyber Threat Alliance is one of those things that I point to at succeeding at scale, right? One reason the attackers do so well is that so much of the internet favors offensive scale.
hmm
Like SolarWinds, right? You hack one and you get access to 18,000 and you actively exploit 110 or so. Cyber Threat Alliance is one of the few places on defense that we've been able to get that kind of scale.
no, I totally agree with that. And you mentioned your framework of indicators to track. You talk about threats and vulnerabilities and impact, which you just mentioned. Now I think of myself as a security vendor. I have a
Hmm.
lot of competing priorities. I really want to,
I
you
think of
know,
you as a security ninja, but sure,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
ninja, whatever, whatever. And I think, and you mentioned in your abstract talking about mapping to the framework.
hmm,
What are you thinking as far as like how the industry can adopt something like
yeah,
this so that it's not like another tax? You know what I mean? So
yeah,
like ingrained in what we
yeah.
do almost.
And defense at scale, right? So our work for New York Cyber Task Force out of Columbia University was looking at what have been the innovations across technology, operations, and policy have given the defense the largest advantage at the greatest scale and the least cost. So it's things like Cyber Threat Alliance, right? It's a new kind of organization. Most of our investment goes into technology inside the enterprise, right? If we, when we leave here and we walk around the vendor hall, 90% of what we're going to see down there, like Palo Alto's business model, right, and that's great. We need to do that because that's where we're feeling the problem. But we actually end up having at least as good a success when we do things like automated update, right? You fix it once and a bunch help. Cyber Threat Alliance, this new organization, right? We had to invent the role of CISO in the 90s. We had to invent ISACs. We had to invent Cyber Threat Alliance. And we had to invent attack, the MITRE ATT&CK
That's
framework.
right.
And just think about how inexpensive that is to have the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Of course, Palo Alto is a very reasonably priced and amazing as well. But right, it's an idea for MITRE ATT&CK framework. And so what we want to do with this is that we just have a relatively light framework so that when Palo Alto Cyber Threat Alliance is saying, hey, wait a minute, we're seeing a decrease in mean time to detect. We're seeing the switching of adversaries. That fits into a category. That's a bucket.
Hmm.
And it's reported in time series. Because right now we have a great set of these indicators, but they're not reported in time series. And so now in your normal kind of reporting, your annual threat reports, you can say, wait a minute, out of what we're talking about, a subset of these help us think not just about the enterprises, but about this large scale as defense being successful at a system-wide level. And let's make sure we report those in a time series. And once we have that, then it makes it really easy. For example, the ONCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director at White House, has to produce a posture report. That makes it easy for them to go and say, hey, wait a minute.
And they could pull it from just kind of do a,
Absolutely. They can
yeah.
say, okay, so for threat actor operations, which is the one I was talking about, mean time to detect and change of TTPs, Palo Alto or whomever, Scientia, Verizon, reported these great statistics on how we're doing. We're seeing the same information similar information being reported by multiple vendors, and they're all directionally consistent.
Yeah.
And these ones are all going the right way. On impact, like what are the economic costs and the national security costs? They're still going down. Like they're still going badly in the wrong direction. So it shouldn't mean any specific, like more work for the cybersecurity vendors, the others that have the data, but hopefully it's going to help us to
More
tell the
about
story
actually
better.
reporting what you actually have.
Right. In
For
the same
example.
way,
Yeah.
same way that attack does, right?
Yep.
This framework's not going to be as disciplined as attack, right? Everything is in there. Everything is in a single category and only one category. There's going to be a lot of overlap when we're looking at this is defense winning framework.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I look forward to seeing how I could participate
Oh, great.
from the Unit 42 side, because I think it's a really important thing that could influence policy and things like that in
Oh,
the right
absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
Final thing I wanted to kind of turn to is something we're both passionate about, which is education.
Mm.
We were talking earlier about the overlap between computer science and School of International Affairs at Columbia, and sort of a lot of the overlap that we have there. And I'll say I got to participate in the Cyber 912
Oh, great.
competition as
Yeah.
a coach. And for those of you, well, you could give a few sentences of what that competition is. Would be really cool for people to hear. But the thing that was special for me is like I was always math guy, ones and
Mm-hmm.
zeros. I'm a reverse engineer, so being able to come and speak in your class, awesome stuff, and then getting to like be in a cyber policy
Mm-hmm.
competition. I think that kind of diversity of mindset. I remember being the coach for all these School of International Affairs students, right? And they're like, "How do you know so much about Chinese hackers?" And I'm like, "Well, I did an instant response for this like all day, every day."
Yeah.
So they're like, "Well, how'd you know this is the type of thing they might do or that they might do?" I'm like, "That's through all the technical
Yeah.
things we found along the way." So how do we get more people involved from diverse skill sets working together? Do you think it's competitions like those? I always reference CTF's
hmm
912 competition. Like, what do you think the best way is to kind of bring that momentum to, cross mindset collaboration?
Yeah. And first, I want to give my thanks to the Black Hat team and Informa, because for the winners of these competitions, they give scholarships to come to Black Hat,
Oh, that's
right? So it's
awesome.
really great. You'll see a lot of them around here. So I founded the Cyber 912 Student Challenge 10 years ago, probably a little bit more than that. Um, Based on my experience at White House, where we had at White House, we'd have the technical folks come in, and they were sure they were experts on what was going on, right? Because they understood the technology and what was happening, but they didn't understand how government worked and how to get things done in government. Whereas the policy folks who understood how the White House works and how everything, they didn't under, they had no clue on the technology. And the only competitions we had back then were capture the flags and the other technical, which are amazing and we have to have. So we founded this competition and we called it Cyber 912 because I think a lot of us, roll our eyes when we hear about Cyber 911 or something like that. So we said, well, let's make it mean something. What happens after the incident, right? How do we respond as a country
Yeah.
or as a community? So he said, we'll call it Cyber 912 to think about the day after. So we'll be holding our New York competition in October. And it's basically getting these students together like they would in the Situation Room of the White House. Mr. President, we think this was Russia, but nobody's died yet. We're still not certain about the attribution. So we recommend A, B, and C. What do you think?
Yeah.
And now it's something like 15 cities around the world. It's Cape Town. It's London, Scotland. It's in France. They just did one entirely in Spanish in Costa Rica. So we've probably had 6,000 students that have come through it. And especially because the students, you get a much more diverse set of students than I think you sometimes do in Capture the Flag, because these students are coming out of policy schools, legal schools, and the rest. Also, let me do a shout out for the class I have next semester with Charles Carmichael and Evan Wolf, because we have students from the business school, from the law school, from the computer science department, and my students from the School of International Public Affairs to study the great hacks. So we put them together into groups, and one group looks at Sony, NotPetya, Colonial Pipeline, and SolarWinds.
I worked on all four of
Yeah,
those.
exactly. And it's
With Charles, so it makes a lot of sense, right?
it is great to see these students all have to come together with the lawyers and the business folks and the rest, which they
love it.
wouldn't normally do until they've been in the field for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, I think, well, number one, I would love to have you come lecture at my class as well, because one thing, my class is very focused on reverse engineering. And so we're like ones and zeros, assembly
Right,
code
right.
all day. And I try to end the class with like, let's go much higher, like higher level and talk about why we've been tearing apart computer viruses all semester long. And actually, so I'd love to have you at the end of the semester come in and really talk about, the broader impact of why what they're learning is so important. And I think the amount of effort you and I are putting in there to sort of influence the next generation is pretty awesome. And I want to just keep increasing that collaboration. I guess finally I want to close with
And
like ask you a question about, yeah, go ahead.
before you jump on, and Columbia is great and we have amazing students, but we don't have the scale. And I just real shout outs to I've seen some great community colleges and and other universities
And even some high
boot,
schools
boot
now.
camp programs and high schools, right? So we're really lucky to be able to do what we do. And so, just for the listeners of the podcast, right? I mean, it's super rewarding to get out and do the teaching. And so, yeah, I mean, like, look for opportunities at the high school. Look, a lot of these places have clubs, to help mentor folks to study for their certifications, tests, and the rest. Like, there's a lot of these opportunities, and a lot of folks that need this step up and to really make it into this really amazing field, right? We're really lucky to be in this field, which has so many interesting problems and can really be the start of an amazing career.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I never thought I would get into like policy influence and stuff like that when I was starting my journey, wanting to be like a video game programmer. But here we are. In closing, what advice do you? I guess you already gave the advice just there. I was going to ask you a question about what advice would you give to aspiring professionals who want to make more of a difference when it comes to some of this policy stuff, some of this, some of the
Yeah.
things you're talking about with your framework. I think a lot of people are stuck in, they have their day job, but they want to have a broader impact.
Yeah.
Is there any recommendations you have there?
Well, first is just going to be keep our eyes on the big picture, right? We get so focused in on if controls are working or if this enterprise is more secure or less secure, and that's great. That's what we need to do. But we need to step back and look at the scoreboard, right? And the scoreboard is not, are we deploying more patches? Are we doing better at detecting signatures and the rest? It's, are we actually defeating the threat actors and giving them, making them stay up weekends, make the threat actors miss their winter holidays, which happens to us every year. Like, I want them to start feeling that pain. And we're not going to be able to
Friday
do that
when these big attacks
right.
drop. And I think
Yeah.
the blog on SolarWinds was published at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. So yeah.
And unless we start shifting that advantage to the defense, right, every enterprise, right, across the internet, across cyberspace as a whole, that's how we're going to be able to have that. That's how we're going to make sure that our grandkids have it better off than we do, and that, when our kids aren't going to be like, okay, Grandpa, here's how you protect yourself online, right? Because we haven't done a good job in making this stuff easier.
I like your optimism, especially for somebody who studies cyber war all day professionally in the history of it, and especially since you're showing the trend over 50 years. So coming out with positivity, I love it. All right, Jay, thanks a lot today for joining us on the Threat Vector podcast. I think it was an awesome conversation covering education, cyber war, and everything in between. Look forward to collaborating with you more into the future.
Great. Thanks to the entire Palo Alto team. It's nice that we can zoom out like this sometime and have these larger conversations. So appreciate everything that Palo Alto is doing.
That's it for Threat Vector today. Stay safe, stay secure, happy reversing. Goodbye for now.